Seems like in the 2020s, being under 20 is no longer a prerequisite when it comes to being the next big thing in pop or breaking into the musical mainstream. To be clear, that was never officially a requirement, but it seemed for a while now it was an unspoken thing. We can trace this all the way back to the explosion of teen idols in the 80s, a logical culmination of the new concept of a teenager, which really started to take off around the 1950s. So for a while, a lot of pop stars, R&B stars, sometimes even rappers, anyone meant to be super mainstream often, they were typically introduced to the industry as teens, many as children, minors either way. Several teen idols, you'll notice they were likely on some sort of kids show, be it Disney Channel, Barney, Mickey Mouse Club, or even a combination. Then after that tenure, they would re-debut, typically as a pop star, typically with a more mature image, so to speak, considering these stars would still usually only be between like 15 and 17 years old. This is actually what inspired Disney to start signing acts like Miley Cyrus and Demi Lovato to their record label, Hollywood Records, after seeing acts like Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, and Justin Timberlake go on to become teen pop sensations with different labels after re-entering the industry. Out of the teen pop acts I grew up with, people like Rihanna, Taylor Swift, and Justin Bieber were actually kind of anomalies in that they weren't known as child actors first. And it's also important to mention this is sort of the pre-blowing up on social media wave. We're on the cusp of it because Justin Bieber is actually a pretty early example. Aside from teen idols being big business themselves, there were several outlets dedicated to covering them, like teen magazines, award shows, even web shows, that made this media more popular. Often it was kind of specific to teens, like the Teen Choice Awards, but then there were other programs, like TRL for example, that weren't dedicated towards kids and teens, but we often watched it because we were fans of the performers, and for teenagers at the time, a lot of the people on that show would have been peers in a sense. I would say though, the teen pop idol wave seems to be dying out in this new decade, because I can think of some recent names like Billie Eilish and Olivia Rodrigo, maybe even Tate McRae, who were teens when they released their breakout hit. But now it's easier to point out breakout stars who don't fit this under 20 teenager mold than the ones who do. But looking back to the past 20 years or so, I was trying to think of a pop artist, especially a pop girl, who was able to break into the mainstream at age 25 or older and sustain longevity. The only examples I could really come up with over 20 or so years were J-Lo, though on the sixes really late 90s, Lana Del Rey, Fergie, and Lizzo. If y'all have other examples, please drop them. But now it seems like most of the pop acts who are breaking into the mainstream are a little older, around 25 plus. I'm thinking of the common examples of Sabrina Carpenter, Shaboozey, Chappell Roan, and Doechii. Charli XCX often gets thrown into this too because despite having hits like I Love It and Boom Clap, Brad's definitely been her biggest era yet. In the R&B game, we've had acts like Money Long and Victoria Monet really break out in the past couple years, despite having done a lot of work and penned a lot of hits in the industry for years. Actually, during her acceptance speech for her Best New Artist Grammy, which she won at the age of 34, Victoria noted, "This award was a 15-year pursuit. I moved to LA in 2009 and I likened myself to a plant who was planted, and you can look at the music industry as soil. It can be looked at as dirty or it can be looked at as a source of nutrients and water. My roots have been growing underneath ground, unseen for so long. I feel like today I'm sprouting, finally above ground." As a result of it being more common and more accepted for pop stars to hit that mainstream status a little later, something else I think this has led to is the longevity of some acts who broke before this was the case. And I'm not necessarily saying this has anything to do with their talent. So for example, people like Gaga, Ariana Grande, Taylor Swift, Beyonce, they all got famous pretty young, either in their teens, most of them are early 20s, but they're still very much main pop forces today, still releasing new music, touring, staying very relevant. With pop stars especially, or any popular genres, it's more the norm that you're at the top of your game, topping the charts for a few years, before your career starts to plateau or stagnate. It's just the name of the game because public interests shift, trends change. But with each generation, it seems like you have a handful of acts who carry over because they've established themselves as the head of their class. But it seems like in the last couple of decades or so, the lines between generations of pop girls, even though it's definitely not an official thing, those lines have seemed blurrier because the replacement rate, so to speak, has become a lot slower. This reminds me of an article that came out almost 2 years ago, one that actually did a video on, from a Billboard exec saying that the record labels were depressed because they were struggling to break new acts other than Olivia Rodrigo and Ice Spice at that time. Some of the reasons cited for this was lack of artist development. So any acts that go viral, they don't get that training or know how to have any longevity in the industry or how to continuously improve their craft. I also think something that's becoming way more apparent now is that someone who comes across well on camera, they may not have that same charisma in front of a live audience, especially if they've never gotten any serious training with performing in front of or engaging a crowd. I think that relates well to this YouTube video I watched just a little while ago, saying that some of the newer stars are so successful because they're bringing back theater kid energy, that unabashed theatricality and spectacle, and fully leaning into their work instead of acting too cool for it while simultaneously expecting us to resonate with it. This isn't inherently a gender thing, but I've said a few times that this is likely why people tend to be more entertained by pop girls than pop boys, just because there's a higher expectation of that spectacle from women. But at large, gender taken out of it, it seems like we're moving out of that phase of I'm sad and bored and too cool for school, so don't look at me. But stream my music though. And that wasn't even an intended Billie Eilish stray, but I do think she's kind of representative of that archetype and also a clear shift out of it. Theatricality is a big part of it, and some people do naturally have larger-than-life personalities that translate well to stage, but that is often something that's trained, at least in some regards. Yet, when a lot of schools are cutting arts programs, parents can't afford them because they're ridiculously expensive. Less and less kids are going to be trained up with that theatricality or with much formal training in the arts, and I don't think it's fair to say it's for lack of passion or that all kids just don't care or aren't creative. And I'm also not saying that self-taught artists don't exist. You can be self-taught and successful, but I am saying that a lot of children who would want that more formal training or would want to be taught how to do something artistic, they simply don't have access to it. Something else I was thinking of, which I feel like should have occurred to me sooner since I have discussed this topic, it's likely true that pop acts breaking later is just another piece of evidence that teenagers are slowly disappearing. Not the kids themselves, but the concept that there is a distinct phase between childhood and adulthood, and creating media cater to the people in that space. And it seems, which I think is normal for kids, that they've chosen to align themselves with the adult pop stars rather than the child entertainers, who are dwindling a little albeit. And plus, when you're a kid, it just feels cooler to do what the older people are doing rather than the younger ones, even if you think back and realize you were a little too hurried to grow up. I don't know whether I feel this is a good or bad thing, more so just an observation when I was referring back to my disappearance of teen idols outline. I had a point in there about artists like TLC, Selena, Miley, and others being part of campaigns that promoted healthy behaviors in teens, like staying in school and out of gangs, as well as things like saying no to drugs and having safe sex. I'm not necessarily of the belief that these artists have to champion social causes to teens. Rather, I just noticed that it was something that was pretty common even when I was a kid and when I was a teenager. Maybe it's happening and it's not on my radar because I'm not a teenager, but I also wonder if it's just more common for these stars, if they have anything to say, to just do it on their social media or join larger campaigns rather than ones directed specifically at younger people. Something else I'm wondering is if it's really as simple as teen entertainers disappearing because it's become more common knowledge now that a lot of these kids were exploited and abused and not completely living the dream in the way that it seemed. I'm sure that's made less young people and parents want to be in entertainment, though some of course still do. But another aspect of this, I think, is that simply a lot of these stage parents have just started to become family bloggers or would rather force their child to be an internet personality because it seems like a quicker, more direct route to fame, one the parent has more control of. So I'm thinking a lot of these kids who might have been forced to sign to a record label and become a pop star, now they're being forced to go on a Disney World trip and being told that working vacation is a gift to them. I think my larger point is I'm wondering if this disappearance of teen idols is influencing the disappearance of teens, so to speak, or vice versa, chicken or egg. I'm sure it's clear, but to just make it clear, just in case, I am speaking mainly from a Western perspective here. As much as I like seeing my peers' pop careers blossoming, I don't think this means that ageism, especially against women, is dead because, look online, look around. I think, though, it's gotten a little better in that a lot of us have realized 30 is not a death sentence, so pushing 30 certainly isn't, even if pushing 30 means 24. I was thinking about how it could be that it seems people are more concerned with age than ever online, but at the same time, a 27-year-old dreaming of being a pop star might have a better shot now than she did in 1995, 2005, maybe even 2015. I think what it is that you're allowed to be older, but you're still not allowed to look it. And with better access to skincare products, better education, tanning not being as popular, cosmetic procedures being more popular than ever, a lot of people seem to age slower, so to speak. And as much as people claim to hate plastic surgery and cosmetic work, I do firmly believe that social media would be even more vicious if cosmetic work wasn't as prevalent and more stars aged naturally, because look how mean we still are to those who do, even though we say we want it. Another way I think social media plays a role not just in pop acts breaking later, but established acts maintaining longevity, is this nostalgia cycle we're stuck in. It's easier with social media when an artist's whole entire discography and performing career is at my fingertips. It's easier to attract new fans when you've got songs from 2009 and 2016 trending along with your current stuff. simply because there's far more for fans to discover and resonate with, and it's much easier to do. And likewise, for similar reasons, it's much easier for that nostalgia to actually turn into a career renaissance. This is kind of related to a video that I wanted to make, but I wasn't sure how to approach. And the point of it was about how it seems like adult contemporary doesn't feel as distinct of a genre from pop, or like top 40 pop, I should say, as it seemed even a decade ago. Because at least in the past, that was kind of the unspoken thing with adult contemporary, that people still liked your music, but you weren't really targeting that youth 18 to 25 demographic anymore, and therefore your fans were typically older, longtime fans, not people who were still forming their music tastes. For example, someone on Reddit questioning the shift defined the adult contemporary genre as mainstream artists that have major name recognition but are past their prime, making music that appeals to aging millennials that have fallen out of touch with youth-oriented mainstream pop music. And I doubt he was being negative here, because I'm pretty sure the person who posted this was also a millennial. In that since abandoned video, one of the primary songs I was focusing on was Die With a Smile, saying it seems like in the musical landscape of old, it would have been a nice little nostalgia-based hit, not even in terms of sound, but nostalgia for Gaga and Bruno themselves, and the song would have been that one that firmly transitioned them into that more legacy act category. But obviously that's not true at all, with the song of course performing extremely well in the Hot 100, but Gaga and Bruno exclusively both still being thought of as regular pop acts without that adult contemporary qualifier. I did find several other articles and forums questioning whether the adult contemporary genre is still relevant, or if it even still exists. It does still exist, Billboard still has a chart for it, for example, but a lot of people have claimed that it wasn't as relevant anymore because of radio's waning importance. And I think it's also because this is a subgenre that tracks the listeners more than the sound, as in any adult contemporary song is going to be a pop, soft rock, R&B, jazz song, what have you. Adult contemporary just denotes the song is popular within that 25 to 54 age demographic. For this reason, it's not unheard of for there to be crossover between the Hot 100 and the adult contemporary charts. Recently, there's been even more crossover because, as I noted, there are less teenagers ruling the charts, and typically that sort of music will resonate with older adults less, therefore not be so present on the adult contemporary charts. Returning to that Reddit post I quoted earlier, of course I read the comments because I wanted to see what people thought, and one thing I kind of agreed with is that we don't necessarily call adult contemporary music that as often anymore. We've started to call songs that fall into that category dad rock or mom rock, so it's partly the terminology that's changed. Even then, people were still kind of struggling to think of strictly adult contemporary acts. Seems like one of the only pretty unanimous offerings was Pink, which I do agree with. And there was even discussion within this forum that while songs like Die With a Smile would count or Flowers would count, they wouldn't necessarily count Miley, Bruno, or Gaga themselves as artists that they would align more specifically with adult contemporary music. The most interesting point I saw here was someone pointing out, a lot of pop and even indie of the past decade or so has been very mellow, non-offensive, and while it might not be aimed at middle-aged people, nobody is going to bat an eye or think it's the least bit edgy. No need to have that division when current pop is already grocery store and dentist office friendly music. Their comment, which was posted I believe sometime in 2023, even though it only says a year ago, it tracks with attitudes at that time, especially looking at the later 2010s, that pop music wasn't as theatrical, bold, or envelope pushing as it had been in years past. I would say that shift has mostly happened within this new decade, and maybe it even seems like it's happening slower if you're only really listening to like those radio top 40 hits. I'm not quite sure. But it does make me wonder if within a year or a couple, as pop becomes more brash and maximalist because we're undoubtedly in that direction and have been, if those maximalist sounds expand beyond familiar genres like disco, so still familiar to most adults even if it is kind of maximalist, will we start to see more divergence in the Hot 100 and adult contemporary charts? As always, thank you so very much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe so that you can stick around for more. Also, if you'd like to become a channel member and get early access to videos, the link is in the description. And again, thank you so very much for watching. I love you all so very much, and we'll see you so very soon. Bye-bye.